All right, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are good. 3 game slate this evening, but reading is a little more difficult for me. There's first few days have been a little easier to break down more obvious pricing inconsistencies, more obvious ownership mistakes. It's a bit trickier this evening. We'll do something similar to last night, where we'll sort of stream of consciousness our way through things and hopefully have similarly good results. Obviously, last night had a bit of a wrench with the did you get DeMarcus Cousins? That was unfortunate the way that worked out, especially with Embiid having a bit of an off game. Their center turned into a little bit of a crapshoot there, but I don't know. Based on me saying that Lou Williams was too cheap 11 times. Apparently, that was enough to push some people towards that good man and thorough. So, getting everything starting up, waiting for people to file into the room. But we should be live now. We'll retweet the link in a minute, and we shall begin in earnest. Some lovely dead air there. Going through transcripts, which you can actually get if you're careful enough about it, of coaches' comments. A couple interesting tidbits about the Nuggets trying to push the pace this evening. About both the Raptors and the Magic likely to give their guys a little bit more time due to the significant 2-day break between Game 1 and Game 2. A couple other minor things we can draw a couple inferences from. Steve Clifford saying that John Isaac got his 40 minutes in Game 1 due to Wes Iwundu's early foul trouble, which I how many minutes were you going to play Wes Iwundu anyway, where he gets his 3 fouls in 9 minutes and you go, oh, well, we better bring this other guy back in and throw out the whole plan because, just... Anyhow, we are live. Alright, so, yeah, I suppose we'll just start talking about these games and let it go where it goes as we get there. So, tipping off first this evening, Orlando, impressively up 1-0, going into the Raptors, who I had winning this series in 5 games. Hard to stick by that now, but maybe they sweep them from here on out. A bit more of a heuristic, standpoint here. I do think, again, while it's important to look at all the things that are important in the postseason as far as coaches' comments and tendencies and condensed rotations, again, the most important thing today, not unlike yesterday, will be zigging when the public zags, finding players who are just underpriced, but also guys who are overowned because they were good in one game. In a single lineup in tournaments, I wouldn't play DJ Augustine under almost any circumstances if he's going to have 30% ownership or something. If you think, DJ Augustine is going to constantly throw up 40 burgers against the Raptors and shoot 80% from 3, etc., while Vooch is doing nothing, like that simply isn't going to occur very frequently. Thankfully, we have him pretty low owned right now. So right now we have 10%. 10%, I'd be more than happy to play that. Though for what it's worth, I would infinitely prefer Dennis Schroeder, who we have at 11%, and is $300 less. And I would have well more confidence and think there's a better ceiling, and just that was your DJ Augustine game there. Almost certainly, this is not like a terribly strong matchup where we should expect him to suddenly be someone that he isn't. So yeah, again, in general, I think you're gonna want to move off guys who had atypical performances first game. So talking about that Magic team a little bit more. Obviously, you can play DJ Augustine. He is going to play himself a ton of minutes. If our ownership projection is remarkably right, I don't mind him at all at 10, 12%. Those would be numbers in which I think he would be just fine. But, that was, the ceiling. That getting 40 out of him is a top 1 or 2% performance. Like, he's got 50 in the tank, but on the road against the Raptors, you're not going to see it very frequently. So, again, coach specifically alluded to playing the starters some extra minutes. So, in theory, you can expect an extra minute or two out of everyone. The main 6 guys they play being the 5 starters and Terrence Ross off the bench. I do think Jonathan Isaac's minutes come down from 40 based on the completely ridiculous Wes Iwundu situation. So I imagine I have him right now projected at 38. Doesn't really change a whole hell of a lot, but other than him, it wouldn't surprise me if everyone else manages to creep up a minute or two at the expense of Kem Birch, Michael Carter-Williams, and the rest of the backup crew there. I still like Jonathan Isaac quite a bit on FanDuel at $5,100. On DK, I think there's a couple other guys I would rather pivot to. One of the wings for Denver, I slightly prefer. Al-Farouq Aminu, I slightly prefer in what's a better paced game at what I expect to be maybe slightly lower ownership, but FanDuel, where Isaac does have real steal and block capability, hasn't been as proficient with it this year as I expected. I had 3 stocks in game 1, I think, on his way to around 30 fantasy points, but the price there also just much more appealing. So FanDuel, he gets the nod for me over several of these other guys. DK, you're playing him over Will Barton and Gary Harris and Al-Farouq Aminu. Probably would rather any of those 3 players in roughly the same position. Although I think Gary Harris may still be one of the few guys on the entire site who they have as literally shooting guard only. Yes, he's still exactly shooting guard only, which is fine. That's really the only position he ever plays. It's just they don't follow that rule with basically anybody else on the site. So yeah, Fournier took a pile of shots in game 1. I want to say 16, 18. I'll go back and look. 18. Shot only 7 for 18. I will still take the under on that. I imagine he takes 15 or 16 shots this game, but that price is kind of appealing. Again, this not as bad as the Celtics and Pacers game, which I sort of waive the maybe don't play guys in this game other than a couple of the cheapies, and we got the game out of the steals game I was talking about out of Thad Young and Marcus Morris. Went off, but that was one of the lowest scoring NBA games of the year, I think. Not just like the playoffs, but 160 points ish. In the modern NBA is a bit of an abstraction. This likely won't be that bad, but I still, and I said this for the first game and it came in, I still like an underbet on this game too, the way they are playing. But Fournier at his prices of basically 5.5 on both sites, certainly not out of play. But again, on DK with all the multi-position eligibility, you are really playing him over Barton for $800 more, and Harris and Aminu and Isaac, and so it's a 3-game slate. I think it's important to stack games a little more than you normally would in short slates without going through the full spiel again. So if you are heavily invested in the first game, I can see playing Fournier over those guys, but not a guy I would likely get to in a lot of single lineups. I probably would rather go with Terrence Ross a little bit, slightly better upside. The DK price is $300 less. The 3-point scoring a little more appealing for him. But again, this is not a game in which I feel, unless you're intentionally stacking, you need to have a ton of exposure to. Vooch on DK at 8,200 is a very nice price. I do like him for some sort of bounce back here. It's not a good spot for him, but I still have him projected for a little over 40 fantasy points. And he's one of those guys that in that 8K range, I do like getting a piece of. Stepping back again and looking at this slate on the whole, the real issue is even with DK lowering the floor for player salaries down to $2,500, there's not a whole lot of value we can feel comfortable in. You have Jakob Poeltl at $3,800, who takes up a center spot, but I still think he plays around his 24 minutes. At $3,800, that's kind of tolerable. There's a bit of a ceiling there, but it's real interesting in that there are not a lot of players sub 4K who really merit a ton of consideration here. There's again been some pre-game press conference notes about we expect to see more Kawhi, which would mean we expect to see more Aaron Gordon. Plus, there's 2 days off between this game and the previous one, so they expect to see a little more Aaron Gordon. So, obviously, you can get some sort of ceiling out of Aaron Gordon at 7,100 on FanDuel. Is a very good price. 6,800 on DK, not nearly as good. Certainly not out of play. FanDuel, I can see running Aaron Gordon over Vooch, and I certainly don't mind having one of those guys in your lineup here. DK, I would rather pony up to the 8,200 for Vooch if you have that. Obviously, they're just priced a little better each there, but I'm not, again, going nuts to get someone from Orlando in my lineup. So I guess back to the beginning, if I was going to order the 6 guys on this team as far as my level of interest in getting them into a tournament lineup, it's probably Vooch, Ross, Isaac, Fournier, Gordon, Augustine. And especially with the conversation about the minutes potentially increasing for the starters, going past that into the bench to the Michael Carter-Williams and Khem Birches of the world doesn't make a ton of sense. Although Khem Birch on FanDuel at 3,600 as a power forward drop guy who can pick up a pile of blocks and hurry. He's a really, really good block guy. I can sort of see him as I think he's the best drop at that position, 3,500, 3,600. Someone asked me about him specifically, so I can see that. I don't like Kyle Lowry that much today. Normally, this is a spot where I would like him to match up, the micro matchup. Personally, not that intimidating. Dealing with Augustine, who ended up being the primary defender on him for most of the first game. The price on DK at 6,500 does bring some sort of upside, but I don't know. For me, Orlando is still an elite defense, and with Kawhi out there and Marc Gasol out there, the sort of burgeoning role of Fred VanVleet, who gets his X time, his inconsistent health. I just don't know that the ceiling is quite there for me to want to play Kyle Lowry. I would rather play Jamal Murray for a couple $100 left, pretty significantly. I don't know. I don't like to manufacture, things that aren't there. It's $6,500 on DK especially. That's a pretty appealing price. But for example, just a 1-for-1, Jamal Murray saves you $100 on FanDuel and $200 on DK, and I still have him projected for 3 more fantasy points. I would rather play Jamal Murray than Kyle Lowry. And again, I am also setting aside again the really not great matchup with Orlando. We have a giant sample size this year that says when there's a lot of Kawhi Leonard, he's bad. You're talking about 60 games or whatever alongside Kawhi Leonard this year, and he was good in 3 of them or something. There are other places I would rather try to squeak the upside. Again, 3-game slate, obviously in play. Danny Green, did randomly drop 50 against the Magic once this year, so, that can happen, but I don't think it's terribly likely. I would rather go with, again, the Denver guys on the wings, so on and so forth. I probably, in a single lineup, am slightly more excited to play Kawhi Leonard than Pascal Siakam, but that's close for me. Aaron Gordon does a pretty good job against Kawhi Leonard. I talked about that a bit before Game 1, and I expected Aaron Gordon to stick Kawhi Leonard a lot of the time, and John Isaac to stick Pascal Siakam a lot of the time, and that is how that went down. That ends up being a slightly better matchup for Pascal, and that reflected itself in the fact that Pascal took 24 shots in that game, whereas I think Kawhi took, I don't know, I'm going to look because I can't remember that number offhand, 18, which is itself certainly not a bad number. And again, Kyle Lowry, part because he obviously was shooting like balls, took 7. 6 of them were 3-pointers, made none of those shots. I expect him to do better than that, but I do think that does speak to a little bit Lowry's absence of really industry and ownership of the situation when Kawhi is on the court there, and when Pascal is on the court, who really can create exceptionally well. Worth noting again, if you're talking about this game, the other starters saw 32 and 33 minutes. Pascal Siakam saw 42. That's a really, really significant number. Now, I'll take the under on his 42. I'll take the over on 33 for Kawhi in this game. But it's going to come down to what the ownership looks like. So let's take a look at that real quick on DraftKings. Because especially on a 3-game slate, that ends up being part of the metric. So we have Pascal at 27%. We have Kawhi Leonard at 29%. So basically tied up. That's really close for me. That is really sort of a coin flip for me. I probably, certainly for raw points, certainly for points per dollar, I'm going to prefer Pascal Siakam a little bit. I think you sort of have to. You're saving $1,000, and I have him projected pretty close to even. But I think there is a point at which Kawhi is out there looking for his contract, trying to earn his money, being a superstar. Obviously, he's not super ego guy, but that last game was a little bit understated for him, and I think there's a giant ceiling there as well. But again, I like both these forwards quite a bit. I don't mind Marc Gasol at all either. Obviously more appealing on FanDuel. He and Steven Adams are both priced much more nicely there, whereas on DraftKings, the spend-up option at center are a little better. 9,200 for Jokic, 8,200 for Vooch. On FanDuel, those guys are quite a bit more, and you have you have Marc Gasol at 57, only $300 more than DraftKings, which is better. And Steven Adams at 65, which is only $400 more in DK, which is again better. So, again, 3-game slate, a couple $100 here and there shouldn't matter to you too much. But if you're building a single lineup and trying to maximize your dollars, which is something you kind of got to do tonight with the paucity of strong value, I'm a pretty decent fan of going with Gasol or Adams on FanDuel. Certainly, they're both very much in play on DraftKings. Past that, again in the poor matchup, I don't want to pay nearly $6,000 for Serge Ibaka. I think their plan is to continue to run Gasol out there in this matchup. We said that before Game 1, and again they split the minutes 32 to, I think Ibaka got like 19. They played next to each other for about 3 minutes, but at 6K, I believe I actually fully pulled him from the rankings at this point. You can obviously run him, but you probably need something weird to happen because he's not going to play in a blowout, and he's not so like you need early significant Gasol foul trouble for that to work out. Probably. Is there a chance Gasol's just terrible and Serge comes on and makes 5 shots in his first shift and they just go to him more? Yeah, but you need a lot of things to break your way, and again, he costs between $5,500 and $6,000. There's a lot of guys with easier paths to getting minutes and getting upside that cost less. So certainly in any nominal or singular amount of lineups, I don't think I'd expose myself to Serge Ibaka. Aldridge and Siakam have a similar projection. They do for me. They're within a couple points of each other. It's worth pointing out on FanDuel, you're saving pretty significantly on Pascal. On DK, it's only a couple $100, but on FanDuel, I think you save some $600-700 on Pascal Siakam, which could certainly tilt you that way a little bit. On DraftKings, again, we have Pascal sitting at 27% and Aldridge sitting at 26%. So that's not going to help you a lot. On FanDuel, I imagine we have this tilted a little bit, although FanDuel does have the way too low Paul Millsap pricing, which is going to tilt it a little bit. On FanDuel, we have Pascal at 34 and Aldridge at 35. And I'll go ahead and disagree with that. I think on FanDuel, for $500, I shall see Pascal out-own Aldridge by a few percent. But for me, they project close enough and prices are close enough. It's going to come down more towards game correlation or non-game correlation. Even if you're building a balanced lineup, do you have DeRozan? At that point, I probably would rather not play Aldridge. I'll definitely go to Pascal. Do you have Kawhi? At that point, I probably don't want Kawhi and Pascal. Not that they both can't get there. But again, the matchup isn't great. I'm fine playing, like on DK, if you end up with Lillard and McCollum, I think that's fine. Even though they obviously correlate negatively, they're both cheap enough, and that game is a little more exciting for me where, yeah, I can see 50 out of Lillard and 40 out of McCollum. I think you can do that. Same thing on FanDuel, actually, where they're both priced maybe even a little bit better. McCollum certainly is. But, so I think for me that decision more often than not would come with whatever story I'm telling with my lineup. Do I think all the games stay close and I'm taking pieces of each? Then if I have Kawhi, I'll probably run Aldridge. If I have DeRozan, I'll probably run Siakam. I think that would be a more telling decision point for me than, trying to handle a point or two of projection either side. Let's go on to the next game for now, and we'll certainly come back to this in questions and further blathering. So, Spurs and the Nuggets, hour after lock, 9 p.m. game. Again, not a very impressive over/under total here. I actually kind of like an over bet in this if the line is still sitting around 208, 209, whatever it was earlier. Both Coach and Jokic and Jamal Murray spoke about the desire to play this game faster than they did the first one. They played a pretty paced-down game, which they did several times in their matchups with the Spurs this year. But obviously lost game one and looking for some adjustments to make. And one of them is the fact that the Spurs defense, while exceptional, does tend to allow a lot of fast break points and allow pretty good efficiency on fast breaks. It's one of the sort of few chinks in the armor, if you will, in the Spurs defense, which generally is pretty exceptional. Them winning game one in Denver was the first time either team won a game on the road this year. They're two very good home teams, and certainly this is sort of a must-win spot. But I do expect this game to pace up a little bit, so I think I'm 3-0 in postseason bets so far. I'll try to push forward. I'll go for an over in the Spurs and the Nuggets. Someone let me know later if you bet it and it comes in, or yell at me if you bet it and it doesn't. I like Jamal Murray a fair bit there. The time is more secure than several of the other guys on the team. When they pace up, it does tend to affect him disproportionately well. I like him more than Kyle Lowry again for $200 less on DK, $100 less on FanDuel. There is a real floor there, but 3-game slate, Jamal Murray, a guy I would certainly want to have a fair bit of exposure to. Paul Millsap is too cheap on FanDuel. He's not Lou Williams, just too cheap. From each of the first 2 games, or jumping up and down on a pretty ridiculous $6,700 price tag that maybe they'll move it now, because it didn't move from game 1 to game 2. He's not as underpriced as Dennis Schroeder is on FanDuel. That's an even better bargain guy that I suspect I would be over the field on. I think when I looked earlier today on FanDuel, we had him at like 25%. He's one of the best plays on FanDuel. He has a very real floor, very much like Jamal Murray, but he has a very real ceiling. That's a game you're trying to buy a piece of. I'm a big fan of Dennis Schroeder tonight when we get to that game. But the Spurs, Derek White, very much in play, especially on DK. $5,000 is the price that carries a very big upside. Actually, ends up projecting very similarly to, say, Dennis Schroeder, where 40 is not surprising at all. 18 is not surprising at all. Now, the real reason I would prefer to play Schroeder, who's going to save you, I think, $500 on FanDuel and cost you $300 extra on DK, though I'd prefer him either place, is I do think those minutes will stay there. They gave basically Terrence Ferguson, who normally gets well more time, only the ceremonial start in game 1, and you ended up getting 36 minutes out of Dennis Schroeder off the bench. He shot like hot garbage. I think it was 5 for 17 or something, and only gave you 25 or something fantasy points. But that was a bottom 10-15% performance out of Dennis Schroeder. It can get worse than that. You can get 14 out of him. Like, he can disappear. But if he's going to play 36 minutes and be that active, I'm pretty excited to get Dennis Schroeder out there. Why is Barton getting so much love tonight? He's a guy who I'd be more interested in fading than playing in general. He is well too cheap on DraftKings. He just is for a guy who carries an upside. He's in the 4s, and value is really thin tonight. FanDuel, where he's 5.5, I would have him after Isaac and several other guys we've talked about. He had a double-double in game 1, put together a very nice fantasy game. That's not going to happen super frequently. The pace going up does help him, but he's popular because he luck boxed into a points and rebounds double-double in game 1, and it is cheap. I mean, he is underpriced. Gary Harris is also underpriced for the minutes we expect these guys to see. And again, this is pretty close to a must-win game for the Denver Nuggets. It's weird to call a game 2 a must-win game, but I don't want to go back into San Antonio down 0-2, and I don't think they would either. So, I do think a floor game is very possible for Will Barton. He is not healthy, hasn't been healthy this whole year, or maybe he is finally healthy in the past few days, but he's had a very lingering hip issue, very similar to Isaiah Thomas on the same team. I am concerned with his ability to get there, so he would be my least favorite Nugget to play for that reason. There's a pretty long history of him not being great this year. I would rather play Harris or Murray or Millsap or Jokic on that team. And not a ton of interest on the bench there. If I'm playing the bench, it's Monty Morris first and Mason Plumlee second. But I don't expect to see enough time out of Torrey Craig. This isn't really a Torrey Craig matchup. You play the Rockets, Torrey Craig is great. He plays 25 minutes. They throw him out there. He's their best answer to James Harden. Spurs have a pretty even-handed offense. You don't have one guy dominating the team. Maybe he plays 18 minutes and they stick him on DeRozan, who is their most potent offensive weapon in Game 1. Speaking about the Spurs a little bit more, I do prefer DeRozan to Aldridge still. Said that before Game 1. Turned out to be the case. So I'm just bouncing all over the place here. So I was talking about Derek White and saying I preferred Schroeder and explaining why, and then talked about Schroeder for a while. You obviously still can have any amount of exposure to Derek White you want. There is 33-minute upside. There is 45 fantasy point upside. In that time, I really don't mind the matchup for him. Foul trouble issues, a pace up I think helps him as well. So I legit like Derek White. I would rather play most of the other wing guys over Bryn Forbes. 3 games late, Bryn Forbes not out of play, but would rather play Harris, Barton, etc., etc. Like DeRozan, probably my favorite guy on this team, especially that DK price. It's just too cheap. Not super too cheap, but he should cost a little bit more even in their playoff. Everyone is, or the top guys are all cheaper than they should be pricing. And again, Jakob Poeltl at $3,800 on DK is a rare piece of value that I feel okay about. And that's quite a statement because most of the value I feel pretty poorly about. So, yeah. Like DeRozan, like Derek White, like Jakob Poeltl, like Jamal Murray, like Paul Millsap quite a bit on FanDuel, where I saw he was the chalk, and he should be the chalk. And he is the chalk. We currently have him at 58% on FanDuel. He's $1,000 too cheap, and power forward is kind of stanky. So I'm not super shocked by that. Yeah. Okay, we'll bounce ahead to the third game for a bit and come back, and I'll get into all your questions. Again, if you're watching on the YouTube, go ahead and send questions via Twitter, probably the best way to do it. Premium Slack, I'll get yours in a minute. The last game of the evening, obviously the most friendly from a fantasy perspective, one you want to get some exposure to, the Oklahoma City Thunder visiting the Portland Trailblazers. A moment. I apologize. I want to make sure I'm not. I just had a batch of alerts refresh and I wanted to miss. Could you play Gordon and Siakam together on FanDuel, or would it be a negative correlation? I like them both. No, they'd be positively correlated. They're both fine. They'd be positively correlated. They're in the same game. In general, they'd be positively correlated. They don't even defend each other largely. They will, just because of switches. But generally, Siakam is on Isaac and vice versa, and Gordon is on Kawhi and vice versa. So, yes, you can play 2 guys from the opposite game without any consideration or concern whatsoever. Would I go back to Zach Collins? I mean, I would be disinclined to play Zach Collins this evening, just because Enes Kanter's been good, and he has, for this team and the whatever we're talking about now, 9 games he's played for the Portland Trailblazers, managed to get through some very difficult matchups, and every time has stayed on the court and been productive. Humorously enough, his first 2 games, which were the gimme games against the Hawks and the whatever, he was kind of disappointing, and since then, he's been remarkably consistent and effective, and they are just sticking with him. So, Zach Collins not out of play. You obviously can get foul trouble on Enes Kanter just from, Westbrook or George crashing into the lane, or Steven Adams and getting into some bully ball. But I mean, that seems to me the only scenario in which the Zach Collins thing is going to work out. There have been many times in the playoffs, playing for many teams, in which Enes Kanter has been such a defensive liability that even on teams where he was playing 25, 30 minutes going into the postseason, he ended up playing 10 minutes a game in the postseason because teams, most notably the Warriors, just beat the shit out of him. They just literally went switch, 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 switch. Sweet, we got anyone who can handle the ball isolated on Kanter. He's going to score. And did that 10 times in 12 possessions. I mean, it was that significant. We haven't seen that yet. I was concerned for it. I've mentioned it a few times. Watching him play, again, I haven't seen any noticeable shift in his defense that I think there's much of a difference going on here, but am I shocked if at the end of the day Stotts pulls the rug out on him today? No, but I think he's built himself some leeway. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know. I mean, especially with Portland winning the first game and him being very good for the last half dozen games and really solid and good enough defensively for them to, get where they needed to get, I don't think the rug gets pulled tonight. Could it happen? Sure. But it would be tough for me in any nominal amount of lineups to recommend, particularly picking against him. And for that reason, again, he himself is a fine play. I ranked him a B in cash and an A in tournaments. Like, he's been really, really productive. Coming down to the end of the year, he had 51 in the first matchup here. He had 44 fantasy points in the game before that. In a game with Denver, he had a poor shooting game and had 28. But before that, a string of 36, 46, 44, 41. The guy's been really productive. 4, 20, and 10 games in there. Really hard to rule him out for that reason. FanDuel, I think I slightly prefer the Gasol and Adams plays for $1,300 and $2,100 less. But, $7,000 on DK. Hard for me to get away from that. Not really interested in anyone on the bench on this team. We saw extra minutes for Rodney Hood and Evan Turner in the first game, but that had a lot to do with the fact that Mo Harkless was in really significant foul trouble. He had, I think, 5 fouls in his 21-odd minutes. I expect those minutes to climb back to a touch over 30, making those other guys unplayable. But none of the guys we expect to see minutes on either of these two teams, being the 4 non-Terrence Ferguson starters and Dennis Schroeder, and the 5 starters for the Trailblazers, those 10 players. I like all of them pretty significantly. There's a decent chance that at least one, if not both of the other games, turn into a bit of a shit show. And some of these guys are almost certainly going to be productive. So I have a fair amount of confidence in these guys relative to the guys in the other games. I like Al-Farouq Aminu. I think he makes a very nice pivot off mega chalky Paul Millsap on FanDuel, especially if you're playing Jokic. I would certainly run Al-Farouq Aminu out there for the same price as Millsap. I have Millsap projected for 4 more fantasy points, but you're going to be looking at, I presume, 12% ownership as opposed to 55, so I'd rather play him in that situation. On DK, I'd rather play him than John Isaac. I'd rather play him than several other guys, and again, the price there is pretty tolerable at $4,800, so I like Aminu a fair amount tonight. I like Harkless, especially coming off a shit game. No one's going to want to play him for that reason, and that's a pretty bad reason, so I'm a fan of that. McCollum, points per dollar is actually probably a little bit better than Lillard. I have McCollum projected for about 34. I have Lillard projected for about 44. And I think I need to redo my work there, because Lillard should be a couple points higher than that. He's generally been in this matchup somewhere in the 48-point range for me. But regardless, you're saving $2,800 on FanDuel going to McCollum and $2,300 on DK. They were roughly equivalent. They may have taken exactly the same number of shots in the first game. Which, again, I would think a couple more for Lillard in general. McCollum took 3 more shots. McCollum shot 9 for 24. That's bad. Lillard shot 9 for 21. That's better, but still pretty bad. But points per dollar, I'm a little more comfortable in McCollum, and he gives you some exposure to that game where you're not playing neither of those guys, and neither of those guys in Cantor being one of the teams we expect to be most offensively potent tonight makes you feel kind of bad. And you're probably trying to get Paul George or Russell Westbrook or Jokic or some stud in your lineup. So frequently I can see myself paying down to McCollum to get a piece of that, leaving my point guard position open for either value or obviously Westbrook, as we've alluded to. Looking across the ball, at their prices, I prefer Paul George to Russell Westbrook. I will take the savings on both FanDuel and DraftKings and the position basis. I am slightly more comfortable playing PG-13 than Russell Westbrook. In this matchup, I do have Westbrook projected for more raw points, but not enough to cover the differential between the two of them. Let's take a look at what the ownership looks like, because that could certainly color my opinion a little bit. On DraftKings, we have Russell Westbrook. I was going to say well higher, but we have the ownership projected to be very, very dense. And what I mean by that is our top projected player right now on DraftKings is Damian Lillard at 38%. There are 9 players projected over 30%. So from first place to 9th place, we have all of an 8% differential in ownership. We have Lillard, Jokic, Westbrook, Barton, Harkless, who I didn't think would be that popular because he was shitty. If that number's right, then obviously that would color my opinion a little bit. Aminu, Danny Green, which we have 32% Danny Green right now, and don't get me wrong, it's not completely outlandish because 3 games and the value is ass, but I do not want 32% on Danny Green against Orlando. That's insanity to me. McCollum, George, and then we have 2 guys at 29%, 1 guy at 28%, 3 guys at 27%, 2 guys at 26%. So literally, our most owned guy is Damian Lillard at 38. Our 17th most owned guy is Paul Millsap at 25. And I guess the takeaway from that conversation would be, if there's not going to be that much differentiation. So, a few days ago, we've done very well in the playoffs. Lots of people have made lots of money. Many people have won every day. I've had 5 people tell me they've won every day so far. No one has told me they've lost every day yet. If you're out there and you've lost every day, send me a tweet so I can be rooting for you, because it's generally gone fairly well. And there was a whole day where we just got there based on me kind of hating on Jaylen Brown, where he was 40% owned and the chalkiest player on the slate, and I just thought there were 7 guys who were better. And it was a situation where it's like, okay, clearly you can get away from this guy, and that, gives you a very unique lineup, and Jaylen Brown moving into the starting lineup, hurting his usage, going against the Pacers, that really wasn't tough to figure out. There's not a lot like that tonight. I don't look at any of these value guys and go like, yeah, this could blow up in your damn face. Lillard at 8,700? Yeah. Jokic at 9,200? It's not a good matchup. He had 55 on DK because he hit the triple-double, something like 48 on FanDuel in the first game. That was his best game of the year against the Spurs in 5 tries. 9,200 is a perfectly tolerable price. 10-3 for Russell Westbrook is great. I think it's slightly less great than $9,000 for Paul George, but that's a great number. Mo Harkless at 4,200. Again, that's a game I want a piece of. 4,200 is not much to spend. 4,800 on Aminu I like. Danny Green is shit, so I will make an exception to my rule of all these are decent plays. But I guess my point being, as opposed to then where it was really important on that day and many other days to move away from ownership, here I'm just kind of looking at playing better plays. Because, when your 15th most highly owned guy is 26% and your 4th most highly owned guy is 33%, you're not gaining anything by shedding the more popular guys. So it's important to look at that and comment. So for what it's worth, assuming our read on the ownership is good, which it really tends to be, I would be disinclined. Kawhi 0 for 3. There you go. Really? Kawhi, by the way, who's I know I have seen in chat rooms in which I've been hosting shows for 4 years and has won many large GPPs. Not the guy I expected to step up and say he was 0 for 3. Did you not watch my first few? All right, never mind. I'm not going to get into that. Alright, so let me finish talking about this game for a minute and then get into some questions. We have 20 minutes to go. So touching more on some of the players here. Again, none of those 10 guys were going to bother me. Did a pretty decent rundown on the Trailblazers there. I love Russell Westbrook. Please don't misunderstand me. projects point per dollar slightly worse than Paul George, and apparently will be owned slightly higher than Paul George. So for the collection of those two reasons, I would slightly rather play Paul George. The Raptors starting who we thought they would. But that's Westbrook, that's George. Terrence Ferguson, I really don't like playing when he's going to play 30 minutes. I sure as hell don't want him if he's going to play 16 minutes. Jeremy Grant is fine. I have him projected slightly less than Millsap on FanDuel, but the ownership is apparently going to be well less, so that's a fine pivot there. Strong cash play in the mid-5s, going to see a giant pile of time. I like Steven Adams a lot still. FanDuel at 65, close to my favorite center. Might be. Like I'm a little bit more than Marc Gasol, like I'm a little bit more than Jokic at that price. I have a feeling he might be my favorite center there. It's a good spot for him. I'm projected for near 35. And again, Dennis Schroeder is underpriced. He's underpriced on DK at 5,300 if he's going to play 36 minutes, just for the ceiling. I have him projected for a touch over 30, but he has one of the wider, Gaussian delta ranges of any player on the slate, where I'm not surprised to see 17, and I'm not surprised to see 44. But especially the FanDuel price of 5,200 is well too cheap. Let's go ahead and burn through some questions. If I missed anything, I trust you, and I'm sure I did. I trust you will correct me. If you're making one lineup on DK, do you think it's okay to fade this game? I presume you were referring to the first game when I said that. If you were making one lineup on DraftKings, do I think it's okay to fade this game? So you would be playing no one from Orlando and Toronto on DraftKings. Yes. That is a game, and we very nearly saw it in Game 1, where no one really needs to get there. Toronto runs a really balanced offense. If you go back and look at the, if you go box score Game 1, the guys you wanted from Toronto were Pascal Siakam, and that's it, right? I think. Lowry didn't get there, Danny Green didn't get there, Kawhi didn't get there, Marc Gasol didn't get there. VanVleet, yeah. So for Game 1 for the Raptors, you wanted Pascal. Pascal was really good. You wanted him. And for Game 1 for the Magic, you wanted just Augustine, right? So Augustine had 40 in that game. Let's assume that he doesn't shoot 9 for 13 from the field and 4 for 5 from 3 and only gets 28 shooting average, and those points get amortized onto Fournier, who had 24, and he gets 28 instead, and Isaac gets 30 instead, and instead of Vooch getting 27, he gets 36. You would have wanted no one on that team. So, yes, I could see the tournament-winning lineup tonight having no one from this game. If I was going to pick a game to play no one from, it would definitely be the first one. So, yeah, I don't consider it so reprehensible I would recommend fading it, but certainly if you build... you've broke even every night of the playoffs, but root for you anyway. Okay, no problem. You don't break even every night. Break even is the rare. Usually, it's lose. If you play only tournaments, your most frequent scenarios are lose all your money, min cash, and make back about double your money, or, hopefully something better than that one day out of 5 or 10. Breaking even every day, I guess you're playing cash games or something. PG on a FanDuel single lineup. Yep. I'm a fan. Alright, let's see. Scrolling through some more of this. Is Birch in play at all? I don't mind Birch on FanDuel. I think he is in play there. If you are punting power forward, I think he's 3,600 and would be my favorite 3,600 and under power forward. So in that very limited context, I think Kem Birch is in play. Looking for questions. DK GPP's thoughts on Canner. Yeah, I got into it. I like him. I gave him an A GPP ranking on DraftKings. He clearly has the ability to put up 50 for 7K, and that's quite good. And he has been under... We made a ton of money on that guy from 2 weeks ago to 8 days ago, where I was like, look, he's going to get there. His ownership's going to go down to like 4% here, and he ran off a string of very nice games where he cost 5K and 6K and put up 40s and 45s. So I like it. Lillard or McCollum on DK, I very slightly prefer McCollum if I'm playing one of them. DK Cash, how does Jokic rank with the other high dollar guys like Westbrook, Lillard, etc.? The presence of the double-double and triple bonuses there help a lot. I think I would rather play Lillard or Westbrook in cash over Jokic. It's close, but I think he's a tier down for me. In cash, I would prefer Lillard or Westbrook. They feel just a nudge safer for me. Spurs, Jokic being not the most consistent player, I would rather play Lillard or Westbrook in cash than Jokic. I'd have to sit here and think about it for a while if you ask me like Jokic or Paul George, who is not as consistent. I'd rather play Paul George in a tournament than Russell Westbrook in cash. I'd rather get to Westbrook. Vooch, he'd be in that tier for me. I'd rather play Pascal Siakam in cash than Jokic on DK. Bircher, Wundu on DK. I really don't want to play either of those players, with the commentary going around that they're going to limit guys' minutes. Like, give me the position as a utility and give me the dollar amounts, Hollywood, and I'll give you someone I like more. Because I almost certainly would not, like, I with their news of playing the guys more minutes, I have them each playing like 12 minutes. I don't want to play a guy playing 12 minutes. Missed the beginning of the live stream. Why the love with Isaac? Just because they're going to give him all the minutes to match up with Siakam and Leonard. They're going to give him fewer minutes, but he's just still cheap if he plays 37 minutes at $5,000. I don't love him. But the FanDuel price especially is very nice. Gasol and McCollum or Pirtle and DeRozan on FanDuel, already having Lillard in lineup. In tournaments at that point, it would probably move me to Pirtle and DeRozan. That's very close for me. But I do think you're right. Once you have Lillard in there, if I can play an equally decent team that doesn't have McCollum in it, I'd be slightly more inclined towards it. That being said, if your lineup and the story you're telling is based on not having a ton of that one game, then maybe you take Gasol and McCollum and you play only guys from the Portland game and the Toronto game and hope that works out. Why are people looking at Pirtle? Blowout run? No, he doesn't play in blowouts most of the time. No, he's going to start and play 24 minutes. He costs $3,800, and I think it's 43 on FanDuel where you can get some blocks and stuff. He's just a reasonable value play who will almost certainly get you 15, probably 20. You hope get you 25. 30 isn't impossible, and value blows tonight. Thoughts of double point guard on FanDuel with MCW and Patty Mills. Again, I have concern for both MCW's health, which has been an issue recently, and the fact that, again, Orlando is apparently going to play up the minutes on their starters a little bit more there, so I have concern that you even get like the 18 minutes out of MCW. I'm fine with Patty Mills. Again, and that's one of the reasons I prefer Schroeder to Derek White, is the fact that, Derek White just looking shitty and Patty Mills playing 27 minutes and Derek White playing 23 would not shock me whatsoever. Pop does that shit all the time. But I'm looking now to see if there's another cheap FanDuel punt I consider in play. There really isn't. I really don't want a Jeremy Lin. So I'm fine with Patty Mills on FanDuel. Michael Carter-Williams is a really effective fantasy basketball player when he gets out there. And again, you look at Michael Carter-Williams' game log. This is pretty impressive. He had 18 fantasy points in Game 1 of the playoffs. In the last 6 games of the regular season, he got over 20. It's pretty goddamn consistent. But I think he's down to like 15, 16 minutes here in a not ideal matchup, so I have concerns. I would much rather get to $4,800 Fred VanVleet if you can get there for sort of a double pump. Aminu or Millsap DK? Yeah, again, you're saving pretty significantly on Aminu. I think Aminu's 48 on DK and Millsap is 56. And at those prices, I feel pretty similarly about them, so it's again, the story you're trying to tell there. It's 11 over 30% now. Apparently, maybe the ownership updated. Let me go back at it again. Yes, the ownership is updated. And again, yeah, the Lillard 39, Jokic 37, Westbrook 36, Barton 36, McCollum 34, Aminu 33, Danny Green 33, which so much worse than all the other guys I'm talking about. Like, it's just, I don't know what to tell you. Paul George 32, Marcus Gasol 32, Pascal Siakam 30, Gary Harris 30, John Isaac 29, Kawhi Leonard 28, Enes Kanter 28, DeMar DeRozan 27. So, and even if these numbers specifically don't end up being correct, I do think that there are not any giant ownership outliers because there are lots of studs in roughly equivalent situations. There isn't any particularly brilliant value, so you would get something like this. This makes sense. Looking at this ownership, by the way, the guys who I like at their ownership that really stand out for me. Jamal Murray, we have at 26. I like him well more than that. Derek White, we have at 18 at 5,000. I like him more than that. Steven Adams at 14 at 6,100. I like him more than that. Dennis Schroeder at 12. I like him vastly more than that. Those are the guys who, looking at our current projected DK ownership, I would want more than that. We just got weird confirmation that Michael Carter-Williams will play in our retweet from Fantasy Labs. Let me check a couple other sources, but I'm sure that I expected him to play. That's just weird the way they retweeted an old tweet that he was playing. One lineup on FanDuel is balanced the way to go. No, balanced is almost never the way to go on FanDuel. You almost always want at least a single punt. Just mathematically, it's going to work out when you drop your lowest score that you're frequently going to want to have a guy who costs near the minimum. So I don't know if that defies your definition of balanced. I don't know. I would need a more specific question. Isaac and Lillard or Leonard and White on FanDuel? I would slightly prefer Isaac and Lillard most of the time. Thoughts on Jeremy Grant? Let me make sure I'm getting my Grants right. The Grant on Oklahoma City, which I'm pretty sure is Jeremy, but just in case, be 100% clear. The Grant who plays power forward on Oklahoma City, I think is a very good cash play and certainly fine in tournaments, especially on FanDuel where he's a pivot off a way too cheap Paul Millsap. Again, I have Millsap projected for a little more, and there's a slightly better upside there, but we haven't projected to be the chalkiest player on the slate, so yes, I would generally be trying to look away from that. Looking for more questions. Aminu or Isaac, if you already have Dame and Cantor, it would honestly depend on what the rest of your lineup looks like. If you're mega stacking that game, then go ahead and go with Aminu and grab a couple guys on OKC and roll your way to town. If you're playing a little more balanced game to game, so it's really going to depend what you're doing with your lineup. Which player tonight is most likely to be a complete and total pig fuck? I enjoyed the phrasing, so I figured I'd give it its full readout. Shout out to our sponsors at Yahoo, the best place for family entertainment. Sorry, I can't help it. I guess Danny Green is the guy I've been sort of shitting on the most right now as far as expensive. Like, Danny Green is apparently the chalky player I would have the least interest in matching the field on right now. Trying to get through all these questions. Yahoo Cash, Westbrook, Forbes, and Barton, or PG-13 White, Danny Green, or Kawhi White, Augustine, when you already have Siakam. I love you guys. In cash, I would play Kawhi, White, and Augustine, even having Siakam. Which stud are you starting your FanDuel lineups with for GPPs? Paul George, I think. If I had to look at the lineups I was tinkering around with. I guess Paul George, although again, I don't like the rounding so much. Not really starting, and neither is the field. As again, we have this widely broad ownership curve tonight. Wouldn't really be like starting with this guy, but I guess Paul George is the stud I'm most excited to play. Thoughts on Cantor being projected 16% on FanDuel? I'd want more than that. Again, I will go look at the FanDuel ownership real quick and look at centers. So it's sort of going to be relevant to other guys. We have Gasol at 33%. Yeah, if he's going to play 32 minutes, that doesn't feel bad. We have Jokic at 23, Adams at 22, Vooch at 20, Cantor at 16. Yeah, I'd want more Cantor. Looking at those numbers, Pirtle at 9. Him being that low, I think you were correct to ask the question. I would want to get on top of that. Is anyone on? What question is Eddie answering at the moment? I got lost. Yeah, that happens. Playable under anyone under 4K playable DK GPP. Kem Birch maybe. Jakob Pirtle is the one guy. Second is like Monty Morris, I think. Like, it's really ugly under 4K. Another guy 0 for 3. Okay, well, there's like 3 of you out of like 1,000. Give a guy a break. Kawhi Eisenberg is Fast Eddie Fear. No, sadly not true. Any concerns on the injury for PG-13? He says he feels fine. Yes, of course I'm concerned. I would rather he doesn't have that injury. Factoring that in, I still prefer him to Westbrook tonight. But yeah, 2-1 took your last L yesterday. Prove to us you're not Fast Eddie Fear. I love it. Eisenberg detailing his issues. 50% RHJ day one when Embiid got ruled in. That was your fault. I don't know what you're doing there. Faded Russ day 2 and 40% Boogie last night. That'll make you 3 losers. What do you think about targeting teams that are down in the series? I typically feel they get more minutes or desperate. It's going to depend on the specific team. I don't like to generally apply a narrative like that. Point guard and FanDuel single lineup. White's fine. Lillard, Westbrook, Murray. No strong take there. Rudy Gay take on the edge of playable in tournaments. Again, the minutes are a little less than I'd like him to be. Matchup isn't the most brilliant for him, but he's probably going to get 25, 27 minutes, low to mid fives. I think he's fine in tournaments. Lowry or Murray on DK is Murray. You feel like Dame won't do good today? I feel like you didn't do well on your English test. Burned! Does a positive regression from last game for Lowry make him need to be considered? Yes, he should be considered because it is a 3-game slate. And again, I talked about that quite a bit at the beginning of the show. I'm still kind of anti-Lowry. The matchup and Kawhi being out there and just a 60-game sample of him being balls in that situation, I just think I could get 50 out of Jamal Murray, and I feel like it's really, really unlikely out of Kyle Lowry. You need someone under 4K. Thoughts on Patty Mills as a FanDuel punt? I'm fine with it. I like it. FanDuel GPP, Isaac and Siakam or Kawhi and Birch? Isaac and Siakam. Thoughts on Jeremy Grant? We did that. If you're building your lineup on the premise of Westbrook having a low shot attempts game, does that correlate to Grant and Adams getting more? Schroeder and George more than them. But yes, if Westbrook takes less shots, in general, that would mean Grant and Adams would take more. But it's going to go first to George, then to Schroeder, then to Grant, then to Adams, probably. If you're stacking Oklahoma, Portland, which 4 would you focus on? Probably, based on their prices and ownership, we're guessing, Cantor, Lillard, George, Westbrook, if you can truck that amount of salary. Punt, drop, small forward or center on FanDuel, Jakob Poeltl. What small forward do you have paired with PG-13 on FanDuel? I'm pretty sure it was John Isaac. Isaac, Siakam, or Kawhi Birch. We already did that one. All right, we got there. Like a minute and change left. I'm going back to full news search mode, although again, with 3 games in the playoffs where we sort of know everything about everybody, not super likely we'll see anything, but made it through all the questions just in time. Coming up to it. All right, we are almost locked. We will have and only a 1-game daddy-like. That last game of the NBA regular season where there were 8 games at lock. Whew. That was the best daddy-like of all time. Kleisenberg responding to something. Let me get back to it. Admitting your 50% RHJ play is some raw transparency. Yeah. Well, you don't deserve to be shamed for it. And so here's why it was smart. RHJ had gotten time in the past to deal with Embiid because Jared Allen is objectively terrible about that. And we all talked about that, and everyone knew that before I said it, but Jared Allen, they had been yanking out of there, so they're going to throw someone in there, plus with the fact that he'd had some decent games against Philly and even, gotten time there, and that he's a really good fantasy basketball player when he plays. I got playing RHJ, and I didn't completely sandbag it on the show. I believe my exact words were, I still think even if Embiid plays, there's like a 2 out of 3 chance he still doesn't touch the court. And he didn't. So I don't think the play is terrible, but you really have to get into, like, we're into the playoffs. So I think we all overthought it, and it should have been this. RHJ has stepped on the court, I believe, literally something like 2 out of the last 30 games of the regular season. Are they really going to do that in the playoffs over Dudley, Kurucs, all these other guys who they've shown their confidence in? Are they going to be like, sure, we'll try this again? And so I think that was how, even I, in allowing the 1/3 chance that he plays and you running that much of him out there, I think that was the mental error. Like, we really needed to think that they were going to, and Kenny Atkinson, gets a little freaky, but I think we overthought it. I think there was just we're in the playoffs, we're playing to win. We already have, they have literally 10 or maybe even 11 guys who they play more than him. They're really going to dust him off again. So I think that might be how we fucked it up. Why isn't Marcus All garnering more attention? He played 30 minutes last game. He's not a bad fantasy producer and is needed to be out there to match Vooch. Yeah, I would disagree with your sort of prima facie that he's not getting that much attention. We have him as the highest projected center on FanDuel, where his price is better. But yeah, it's a combination of, it's a shit game environment, which it is. He's the 3rd or 4th offensive option on the team, and the minutes don't feel secure. So I think a combination of those things, but I liked him quite a bit. All right, so let's take a look at some ownership, and then I will get out of your face. Let's see. Is FanDuel broke? No, there we are. All right, so the $350,000 whatever on FanDuel. Clicking through some things. Gasol 22%, Kem Birch 11%. So a lot of people got behind that punt. Jonathan Isaac 42. I probably would have wanted less than 42. Kawhi 32, Fournier 14, Terrence Ross 10. Fine with all those numbers. Pascal Siakam 44. Yeah, that's 7,800 on FanDuel. Aaron Gordon 15. I prefer Aaron Gordon at 15 to Pascal Siakam at 44 and saving a pile of money. Danny Green 22 at $4,700 on FanDuel. Just $500 less than Dennis Schroeder, who I've projected for 11 more fantasy points. I don't even know what to tell you. Alright, clicking on names has bored me. Going over to DraftKings. There's nothing here. Ah, that's because this is my not used in many years DraftKings account. Okay. Log in as someone else. Okay. 100K? That can't be the biggest. 400K toe jam. Big jam. Filled up. Let us download some numbers. Wow, the first lineup I looked at has Vooch 10%. What the hell did we have Vooch projected at? We had him at 20. 10. 10% Vooch feels pretty good at $8,200. And that's what I'm saying. Like, holy overreaction to game one. Like, no, it's not a great matchup. Marcus All, even at this stage of his career, is a well above average defender. He was balls game one, but 10% on a 3-game slate. Oh my god. So yeah, Pascal Siakam we got just about right on, 34%, most popular player in this game. It's about what we expected. Everyone else, a shade less than we expected. We had most of them in the low 30s. They're all in the mid-20s, so we were 5% high on all these guys. But again, real density. The difference in ownership between the second most owned guy on this slate, on this game, and the 6th most owned guy in this game is under 1.6%. So between 24.1 and 25.8%, you have Jonathan Isaac, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, Marc Gasol, and Kyle Lowry are all basically 25% owned. Of those guys, I'd want less Lowry, more Gasol, more Leonard, less Danny Green. That's about the right spot for Isaac. Only 19% DJ Augustine. which again, I was right in that we had projected at like 11 or 12, and I was pretty sure it'd be higher than that because, sheeple. Terrence Ross, 15.5. That's about right. Aaron Gordon, 11.6. That's about right. But Nikola Vucevic, 10.04. Evan Fournier, 9.6. Fred VanVleet, 8.4. Kem Birch, 4.5 on DK. That's some balls. Serge Ibaka, 3.3. That's some balls. Michael Carter-Williams, 2.8. Norm Powell, 1.7. Jeremy Lin, 0.47. Wes Iwundu, 0.41. Jody Meeks, 0.04. Chris Boucher, 0.03. Jerian Grant, 0.03. Emile Jefferson, 0.03. Pat McCaw, 0.02%. Congratulations, you played yourself. They thought he might play today. Actually inactive. Shout out for the one person who purchased a share of Markelle Fultz. You are inventive. You are bold. You are ahead of your time. So there we are, everyone. Weird night. I feel, whenever there's nights I don't have a ton of strong takes. Though I feel better about it looking at the ownership and the fact that everyone is so goddamn evenly owned. There weren't a lot of edge cases to be had there. I do think Dennis Schroeder was one. I do think a couple of the other guys, ended up being a little bit under-owned relative to where they should have been. But, yeah, and as a corollary, I would have at least thought about playing less tonight. The problem with playing less is if you're playing $1,000 night, and then you go, I don't like this slate, I'm only going to play $500. And then you hit the nuts, you feel like an asshole. But I still think it's probably right. This is the fourth day of the playoffs. Fourth day of playoffs. Wait a minute, am I getting my days of the week confused? No, it's Tuesday. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Fourth day of the playoffs. This is the one I felt least ahead of the field on. Like, you're always fighting a 15% rake. First 3 days, I certainly feel like I would have been well ahead of that rake. I could certainly eat that up. I don't know about it today. I really don't. I feel like I'm going to do better than the average person if I'm playing. But enough to cover that rake, I'm not sure. And again, something I've always harped on, and amazingly enough, no one else ever freaking talks about, is I really think you need to vary your bet size in DFS the same way you do in poker and blackjack and every other sort of competitive betting game as a critical part of winning. So, in theory, I feel like I would have wanted to play less tonight. I'm just rambling. So there it is, my friends. Best of luck in your contest. Best of luck if you play on the late slate. I will be back again tomorrow, for this is purgatory for me. I am Sisyphus eternally pushing my rock up the hill. With that, best of luck.